Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. I'm continuing my series about the Second World War, looking particularly at propaganda at the moment. So, every country controlled news. I think it was William Howard Russell, famous 19th century Irish war correspondent, who said that truth is the first casualty of war. So, the democratic countries such as the United States and the UK, well, they certainly tuned the media. The United Kingdom, the Defence of the Realm Act, outlawed spreading defeatism or despondency. So freedom of expression had been curtailed, had not been abolished. The Daily Mirror published a very controversial cartoon suggesting that sailors were dying for oil imports just to make bigger profits for wealthy businesses and so on. The publication was not suppressed, as some people called for that. The Duke of Hamilton was able to publish a letter at the Times in 1940 calling for negotiations with Germany to end the war, things like that. Things that would have been unimaginable in the totalitarian regimes. What else? Yeah, so some of the statistics were massaged. Higher enemy casualties, lower casualties of one's own side, things like that. Sometimes news was not to be reported, denotices. Sometimes it was reported, but only later on. If there was bad news, it wasn't reported until a very big news story was going to take over the front few pages of newspapers. Remember, newspapers were much more important back then, before the internet and television stopped broadcasting in the UK. Same in the US. Radio, newspapers very important. Television only just started. Very few people had televisions back then. So going to the cinema, watching a film, and then seeing a newsreel, your weekly updated 30-minute news broadcast. So things weren't up to the minute. There was no 24-hour news cycle. And totalitarian countries, well, they obviously had to advance the cause of the government, say that we are going to win, our cause is a righteous cause, our men always behave honourably, the enemy are absolutely barbaric, and so forth. They broadcast to enemy countries in their own language, BBC broadcasting to Germany in German, to try and shake the faith of the German people in the Nazi government, try and persuade them they were losing, things like that. So spread a defeatist mentality, tell them the bad news that they weren't hearing at home, and suggest, well, you should surrender, we'll treat you leniently. Obviously the German radio broadcast the United Kingdom in English. There was Lord Haw Haw. He was born in the United States to Irish parents, later moved to Germany, and was broadcasting a very upper-class accent saying, Germany calling, like that. William Joyce was his name. And he was very witty and entertaining, and he was imitating the BBC style. He didn't grow up with that sort of upper-class accent. He grew up in Galway. But he felt he had more credibility if he did that. There's also Donald Grant from Scotland, who was a Scottish separatist, who broadcast on Radio Caledonia, thinking he could appeal to Scottish separatist sentiment. In fact, there was very little of that. The SNP was very minor, and the SNP indeed warned its members against Donald Grant. We don't wish to be associated with him. Things like that. In the Soviet Union, German communists were broadcasting in German to Germany, again trying to sow doubt in the minds of Germans, persuade them that communism was a noble ideology, Nazism was foul, the Third Reich was going to lose, they should rise up against it. Markus Wolf was one of those in the broadcast. He was later head of the Stasi, Ministerium Staatssicherheit, as in the Ministry of State Security in East Germany after the war, when East Germany became a communist pro-Soviet state. So a lot of this fell on deaf ears in the Third Reich, and it was a crime to listen to such things. And Kurt Waldheim, later president of Austria, he recalled going into his father's house in the Second World War, entering his father's bedroom, and his father was listening to the radio, and his father's face turned white that his son had come into the bedroom, because his father was listening to BBC in German, the anti-Nazi broadcast from London, and Kurt Waldheim's father was petrified that his own son was going to rat him out, was going to tell the Gestapo, because if you were caught listening to BBC's German broadcasts in Germany, you could be sent to the concentration camp. The United Kingdom considered banning people from listening to German radio propaganda broadcasts, but in the end they decided they wouldn't do that, because that would suggest it's somehow credible. Moreover, the United Kingdom is a free country, and we allow people to listen to these things. The Gestapo was aware that quite a lot of people were listening to these enemy broadcasts, and so in their newsreels, well, they had a little drama segment when this is a son is chiding his father for listening to this sort of stuff, saying, "Don't you know the whole purpose of these radio broadcasts is to lower your morale?" And the old man is saying, "I'm old enough to tell truth from lies, and don't worry, I won't be fooled by it." Anyway, when the Germans surrendered to the Soviet Union during the wars, they surrendered, they were separated out. Free Officers Association was founded of German officers who were willing to broadcast against the Third Reich in return for better conditions. And the Soviet Union gave them a flag, which is based on the flag of old Imperial Germany, the flag that had until 1918, not the red, black, gold flag of the Weimar Republic, which thought to have little appeal to right-wing officers from upper-class backgrounds. Obviously, they weren't going to use the swastika. Wilhelm Pieck, Walter Ulbricht, and others were German communists who'd been resident in Moscow for some time prior to the war, and they met some of the Germans who'd been taken prisoner at Stalingrad and had them take part in an anti-Nazi demonstration. Obviously, you knew that your life depended on pleasing the NKVD if you were a German who'd fallen into Soviet hands. Therefore, you would go along with it. You could be killed on the spot. You could be just denied any rations. So Lavrenti Beria, the head of the NKVD, watched this farcical display, and he said that Ulbricht was the stupidest cretin he'd ever seen. Many of these Wehrmacht soldiers, they were aware of the countless hideous crimes their comrades had committed in the USSR, and they knew what lay in store for them if they did not keep their captors sweet. But who was just going to convince, really, this spontaneous anti-Nazi demonstration? And the UK was very pleased with the victory at Stalingrad, and they knew that this meant the Soviet Union was very much in the war. The war was going to be won or lost on the Eastern Front. And Soviet newsreels showed huge columns of prisoners marching off towards the horizon, which emphasized the scale of the victory. The British Foreign Secretary at the time was Sir Anthony Eden, and he said this was the most calamitous victory that Germany had ever suffered. I suppose it's right. King George VI commissioned the sword of Stalingrad from gold encrusted with the jewels and had it presented to Stalin at Tehran. George VI wasn't there himself. Anyway, and when it was given, I think, to one of the marshals, they managed to drop it in Tehran that next year. There's a colossal statue in Stalingrad over where that victory is. So states had to direct propaganda towards their own citizens to buoy up morale. And propaganda is not necessarily lying. It can be truth, but it's selective truth, only stating the facts which are helpful towards your side, not mentioning the facts which are unhelpful towards your side. So make people willing to fight, want to fight, believe that they're going to win. If they believe they'll win, they're willing to make sacrifices. If they believe that they cannot win, then they give up quite easily and they're not willing to suffer anymore. So, right. Then more about the Soviet way of managing the war. It's not particularly about communist ideology, about patriotism more generally. Stalin brought back some Tsarist traditions, giving regiments honorific guards titles for distinguished service, awarding medals to many of his generals. And some leading Soviets tried to say that Stalin ought to have medals too. At first, he feigned modesty and professed himself to be unworthy of such gongs. He was not physically brave, and he never went near the front line. In the end, he awarded himself a whole chest full of decorations, including Hero of the Soviet Union thrice. And Hero of the Soviet Union was the supreme award for service to the Soviet state. In March 1943, the Wehrmacht launched a large counteroffensive in the USSR. It was the Third Battle of Kharkov, or Kharkiv, you can call it. It's in eastern Ukraine. General Erich von Manstein managed to defeat the Red Army and drive them back some miles. This battle, the SS division Das Reich, was led by Papa Hauser. Papa wasn't really his name, but he's known as that for his supposedly father-like concern for the welfare of his men. So Hauser particularly distinguished himself. It was only a temporary setback for the Red Army. The Red Army was gaining strength all the time. It was outproducing the Third Reich in terms of material. The numerical advantage was turning ever more in their favor. The German army radio denounced the Red Army as animals and mongoloids and so on. And indeed, many Soviet soldiers came from Central Asia. And the Nazis were very racist and thought that non-whites were always inferior and nonsense like that. Must have been particularly galling to be defeated by non-whites then. So these Oriental soldiers, such as from Kazakhstan and so on, they eventually helped to relieve the siege of Leningrad. In November 1943, Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt all met in Tehran, the capital of Iran, that invaded the country in July 1941 and succeeded remarkably quickly in gaining control of the country and faced almost no resistance. It's astonishing now, really, given how fiercely independent the Iranians are. So it was Kliment Voroshilov was the marshal who was there who dropped the sword. And as I said about propaganda, that wasn't shown on the newsreels. British people, Americans, were told to regard Stalin highly, think of him as Uncle Joe or Marshal Stalin, and so on. Roosevelt and Churchill's relationship was nothing like as amicable as we're led to believe, but the newsreels made us think that they were very matey. They had some serious disagreements, but they kept it under wraps. They'd realized it would not help either of their countries for this to be public knowledge. Stalin pressurized the Allies at Tehran. You must have a landing in France in 1943. They said they were planning a landing in Italy, but France was going to have to be spring 1944. These British propaganda newsreels were shown in the cinema. Obviously, nothing was stated about the disagreements between the big three. Anyway, one of the newsreels said, "Whatever we think of the Soviet political system, there is no doubt about the fighting qualities of the Red Army, and the Soviets were very popular in the United Kingdom, and many people joined the Communist Party. It was not even anathema to be a communist in the United States at the time." The newsreel was tacitly acknowledging that many Britons completely disagreed with communism. The ugly side of it was overlooked, and for the sake of retaining cordial relations, the importance of the Soviet Union as a wartime ally was emphasized. So German PAWs, as I stated, made anti-Nazi broadcasts. General Paulus had first of all refused to cooperate. However, in 1944, he started to do so. Partly, I suppose, he saw which way the war was going. He called upon his compatriots to overthrow the National Socialists and conclude peace with the USSR.